So tell me, what makes a good broker?
Well, obviously results. Obviously results for the franchisors that they're working for and presenting their opportunity to various candidates. But from a broker standpoint, and I've been doing this in franchise development almost 40 years. My entire career of franchising has been over 40, or this is the 40th year. But it's really understanding and listening to what the candidate has to say and what they're looking for. I'm a firm believer in right fit situations. And as we say at Accelerate Success Group, we thrive on connecting the right people, brands, and opportunities. Franchising, as we know, is an interdependent relationship. So it might as well be a right fit situation, right?
Absolutely. So how have things changed since the pandemic has happened?
Well, actually, I saw some of it changing prior to the pandemic, and I think the pandemic put an exclamation point on it. I mean, today's candidates are more sophisticated, educated, and informed more than ever before. And because of that, and because of what's going on through the pandemic and now fighting inflation, supply chain issues, all the different issues, they're being more cautious. They're being more diligent in the process. And I think a big part of that is, franchising has always thrived in and around recessionary periods where this is going to be different and it's already shaping up to be different. In the past, probably you're too young to remember this, but interest rates on money markets were 16 and 17% back through my first recession when the oil industry busted. And mortgages, of course, were 10% back then. But people were getting these big returns on their investment in money markets. So they were, quote unquote, playing with those gains. And so although they knew there was a risk factor, they felt like playing with the gains, they could assume that risk factor. Today, living longer lives, retiring more early, or just having to shift gears without much preparation, they're starting to realize that failure really is not an option. So they really are being very cautious and diligent in the process, which I think is absolutely fine, because I don't think in the past and even today that franchise candidates and eventually franchisees do not do enough in the due diligence and not do enough in research. They feel they do the research by looking at brands, but really understanding how they're going to fit in with that organization. Is it going to be an interdependent relationship where their success is predicated on the franchisors and vice versa, and that they're not an employee of the brand? So there's a lot of different things that I wish they would spend more time focused on. As a matter of fact, I'm even a big believer that when it comes to operations manuals, I like a lot of the language from the franchise agreement at the front of the operations manual, because franchisees typically say, franchise agreement, I haven't looked at that since the day I signed it.
Mhm.
And and we do that with mortgages and everything else. We're just not inclined to look at agreements, but
We're
it does
busy
need to
people.
stay front and center. Yeah. I mean, it manages the relationship.
Exactly. So what I hear you saying is that the industry is ripe right now. Even though maybe the economy isn't where we want it to be, the industry is ripe for franchisees. It's a good time to get in. So what makes the perfect franchisee?
Oh, wow. That's, we probably don't have time for all of it, but a perfect franchisee is number one, that has done their due diligence and prepared to get involved in a business. And the first question is being able to answer from themselves, am I right to operate a business, to own my own business? And B, is franchising or maybe a startup or an acquisition, is that best? And once they've gone through that process, I think they're on their way to being the right franchisee. But then understanding what it's going to take in a particular brand, it's got to be a right fit for them. It's got to be something they enjoy doing, something they can see themselves having a passion for. But more importantly, can they visualize themselves in that particular business, because if they can't, and they can't see themselves long term in that business, then it's not going to be right for them. And of course, obviously, there's the things like being well capitalized, but believe it or not over capitalized to the point that they figure they're just going to continue throwing money at it. But I think the last point on that, and I think this goes to any relationship, is making sure they have approval. And I don't mean it in a sense of like a signed document, but just good common approval from their partner, their spouse, from their family, because I've seen too many failures occur because everybody wasn't always on the same page.
You have been in this business for 40 years, leading that team.
Yes.
So it's interesting to talk to you because, you've seen it all. You really have. And when you say that they need to feel supported at home, you don't
Yeah.
often think of that. That's the ticket. Or if you have too much money, sometimes that's not a good thing. We don't hear that very often in society, right?
No, we don't. And I've been there and done that, and I've seen all those ends of the spectrum. Um, Overcapitalization with family money in, and thinking things are going great until they reconcile and they realize they just spent a ridiculous amount of money, and it wasn't the business. The business was there. It's just they kept beefing up inventory and just spending money, needless employees. It was just everything was from an ultimate safety net. And I think a big part of that was the franchisee came over from Black and Decker, big corporation, probably has inventory out the wazoo and number of employees. It's kind of hard to make that shift into a small business when you're coming out of corporate America, even though we always hear, and we heard this through the 2008 to 2012 debacle, transitioning executives. I don't know. I think looking back now, I don't know if we can say that all transitioning executives will be successful. A lot of them just did not make it.
Very interesting because we all get set in our ways, right? I mean,
Yep,
it's human
absolutely.
nature. It's human nature. Okay, so from the franchisor perspective, what advice would you have for franchisors when they're wanting to go and find a great franchisee? Somebody that they can, is a sure thing. What advice would you have for franchisors who are looking?
Well, we're looking at obviously a couple of different types of franchises, or whether they be legacy brands or whether they be emerging brands. From a legacy brand standpoint, and actually it works for the emerging brands as well, is making sure that they have their house in order. Making sure, and I've written an article about this for the IFA, and I've since published it again. It's, regarding the customer experience, the positively memorable experience. It's not just for customers. It really is for franchisees as well. Will a franchisee look at the situation 2 years from now and be as excited as the day they were when they signed their franchise agreement and remitted their franchise fee? So the bottom line is making sure, A, it's a positively memorable experience, B, making sure there's open, transparent communications, and three, listening to the franchisees, because they are on the front line, and being able to look at it from the standpoint, even though franchising is replication of processes and systems across a wide area, California to New York, etc., there still are some local geographic nuances that have to be taken into consideration, and a franchisee should not be afraid to provide their input. On the emerging brand side, this is a whole nother story. Ron Feldman, who's with Apple Pie Capital right now, I remember him at the Springboard conference, one of the first ones, and he stood up at the podium in front of a large group of emerging brands, franchisors that barely were in business, and he said to them, and it's lived with me since then. Resoundingly, he said, "Why would you think a franchisee, a person, would buy a franchise from you in your system when your own balance sheet wouldn't qualify you to buy that same franchise?" Wow, that I must repeat that 10 times a year.
Hmm. And that probably makes you a good broker.
Yeah, look, we're in business to make money ourselves, but at the end of the day, I want to make sure that people we're putting into place thrive. Um, when I spent time as the president at the Franchise Brokers Association and as an interim CEO for a year at the Entrepreneur Source, two very large groups, um, I was all about building equity in a business. And so I look at it from a different perspective. Typical broker in any type of professional services, financial planner, brokers, it, real estate brokers, franchise brokers, business brokers, and I'm also a certified business broker, by the way. Too many times they end their business when they retire and they just walk away. They feel they don't have equity. And the only way to build equity is through that repeat business and referrals. So why not go at it from the standpoint of doing everything you can to ensure your client's success so that you can build a book of business that one day you'll be able to sell. And that's another reason why I'm so big on content and I get strategic partners involved because one day they are all part of my business and I'll be able to sell it over to somebody else.
Sounds like you're winning.
I hope so. It's not without ups and downs. I am an entrepreneur, so I'm always looking at new things. And pandemic pushed us in that direction where we've actually spent a big part of our time outside of franchising. And to the point of the right franchisors, it was with brands that came to us thinking they wanted a franchise. And for whatever reason, capitalization, personality, systems, bandwidth, etc., they weren't ready for franchising and they weren't right for franchising.
Man, Paul, you have a wealth of information. And I guess my last question for you today is, so are you going to be at it forever? Do you ever hope to retire? And if you were to retire someday, what would you do?
um, my wife, who is my wife of 45 years, come this June. Maybe that's why I love franchising so much. It's about a long relationship. I don't. She would argue that there's no way that I would retire. That's number one. Number two, if I got to that point, I'd probably come right back and consult with some companies anyway. And of course, writing is my passion. I'm in the middle of a book right now called "Small Town Entrepreneurship: A Return to Main Street." I believe the pandemic has put a fine point on people moving beyond the suburbs to the outer suburbs and small towns. And I see a kind of a return to what franchising was like 20, 25 years ago when somebody, retired maybe from the post office or some other blue collar job and said, let's own our own business, and it's mom and pop operating it and a couple of teenage kids along the way are helping it, and it's in that small town as opposed to the big city. Obviously the big city is going to continue to grow, but I think the big wave is in small town USA. I really believe that.
That's super interesting. And we'll look forward to reading your book. You'll have to come back and tell us about it.
Absolutely, I'd
Paul,
love to.
so great to see you today. And congratulations on an award well deserved.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.